This is the build video of my Air Hogs Titan RC glider conversion. The Air Hogs Titan, I bought it from Target for $6.49. It was on clearance, and I decided to cut in some ailerons and an elevator, put in some RC components. So here you can see me measuring for the ailerons. I cut those out. That's 1.5 inches in, and you can see where I made the cuts on the ailerons. Once I cut out my 1.5 inch piece, or I'm still cutting, take those off and then cut at a 45-degree angle in order to make it hingeable. So right there I'm cutting at the 45-degree angle, and that should make a nice swivel hinge. And I attached the aileron back on with some white packing tape so it sort of matches the color of the foam. I had to trim a little bit on either end of the aileron so that it could swivel freely without touching the other piece of foam. I found that the 1.5 inch surface is sufficient to control the plane, as you'll be able to see in some of my follow-up flight videos. So now I'm just doing the aileron on the other side. It's much easier to do these before attaching the wings to the plane. You can see that I do some tape as well on the underside of the aileron. That's just a carryover from the way I do my my elevons on my wings. Just adds a little bit of extra strength. Okay, here you can see me doing the elevator, and I don't like the way that I did the elevator in the main build video, so I have a follow-up video at the end of this that'll show you the change I made. You see how I did those cuts angled on the elevator? I wish I had done it straight across. If I had done the cut straight across, the hinging would be easier and it would have worked a lot better, and I wouldn't have had to eventually replace that piece of the elevator with a piece of Dollar Tree foam board. So for all purposes, you can ignore what I do here with the elevator, which is unfortunate because it took a significant amount of my effort. I spent a significant amount of my time trying to get this elevator to hinge and work properly. The same holds true though. You still need the 45-degree cut for it to be able to hinge downward. One thing I did do on the horizontal surface, the horizontal stabilizer surface, is I put a couple of carbon fiber rods, one on each side, just to add a little bit of rigidity to it. This type of foam, it's not quite the same type of foam that I'm used to on my stronger planes like the Hawkeye or the Bixler. I don't know if it's EPS, I'm not sure what it is, but it seems to be a slightly less compacted version of EPO, so it breaks a little bit easier. It's still, you'll be able to see a couple of the videos I've had after I've added wing spars and other things in. I've been able to take some rough landings without destroying the plane. So anywhere I thought I needed some extra strength, leading edges, I've added some packing tape. So here I'm going to do a wing spar. I'm just lining it up to see whether or not the driveway markers from Home Depot would work, and I figured that those would be too large and too heavy. So I ultimately decided to go with some thin carbon fiber. And what I do is I cut a slit across the wing, and then just insert the carbon fiber vertically. It's thin, a thin wide strip. I don't know if that makes sense to you. It's not like it's square. It's It's like a thin wide strip. So what this is giving is, this will give some rigidity against wing flex, but it's not going to give rigidity against the wings bending backwards. Wing flex is what you're really concerned with here. So I push that right in, and then a thin layer of Gorilla Glue just so that the foam seals back up, and a layer of packing tape over top of it to kind of hold the glue in and hold the spar in. And then I do some tape on the leading edge of the wing for a little bit of strength. As far as the wings go, I wouldn't do things any differently if I did this build again. I'm quite happy with the way this worked out. I got the carbon fiber from Hobby King, and I don't remember how much it was. Not very much, but anytime you're ordering something of that size, they add in a box, a cardboard box of 379 grams. So just make sure you're going to have a sufficient order to make up for having to ship the original 379 grams for the box. So what I did is I ordered enough carbon fiber to last me a year or two, basically, and fiberglass rods that I use in almost all my builds, one or the other. Yeah, so this is where I'm just using some thin pieces of carbon fiber. These aren't the thin, thick pieces. These are just like square, very thin square, the very thin round pieces, and I just tape them onto the bottom just for some extra rigidity. If I was doing it again and I had cut it off properly and I was putting this in, I probably would indent a little bit into the foam and lay the carbon fiber right into the foam, and then tape over it, glue and tape over it. This video has been sped up 10 times. Again, the elevator, as you're seeing it there, the camera just slipped here. I'll reset it in a few seconds. The elevator, as you saw it there, has changed for the final version that actually flies. There we go. Now it's set up again. And now I'm doing a carbon fiber spar, or carbon fiber reinforcement, just along the fuselage, the length of the fuselage. So the same thing as the wing, I cut a slit and then shoved in one of the long thin pieces of carbon fiber. And then what I did is I put another piece, I don't know if it shows it there, maybe I'll just follow what I'm doing in the video rather than explain. Right now I'm doing the servos. And the way I do these, I originally tried cutting it out and it was too much of a pain, so I don't have a hot wire cutter. So I ended up using my soldering iron. It's a very old soldering iron, so I really didn't care if I mucked it up a little bit. And I use it to melt away the foam for where the servos sit. It required a little bit of cleanup afterwards, and there were some fumes, so I would recommend doing it in a well-ventilated area, maybe even wearing a mask while you're doing it. But it did work very well for fitting in the servos. I think this is going to become one of my go-to techniques. It's almost worth having another cheap soldering iron just for working with foam like this. I actually used that same soldering iron technique for the servos and to cut out the part of the fuselage that I use eventually for the battery. You see here me doing the tail servo, or yeah, the elevator servo, using the same technique with the soldering iron. Just making sure all the surfaces move properly. And now I'm going to do my control rods. And of course you can see the blue light, that's my servo tester. I use that to keep the servos centered while I'm setting them up, to make sure I've got things in the right locations. I just use a Z-bend tool for my control rods. And the control rod material itself, they're survey flags from Home Depot or Lowe's. We're about halfway through the build video at this point. There you go, you can see it wiggling around. Those servos that I'm using, they're HXT 500. If I was doing it again, I use these because I had them lying around and I didn't have any 9-gram servos. I probably, with a plane this size, would like to use the 9-gram servos instead of the 5-gram servos, so the HXT 900s instead of the 500s. But I just used what I had lying around. And a little hot glue just to hold things in place. A couple touch-ups with the soldering iron. We're ready to put the servo in on the other wing. I think I'm almost ready to start gluing pieces in. So there, you can see I'm already having problems with the elevator. I'd already had to cut it out again and try a different type of hinge because the tape hinges weren't working. So I thought I'd use a plastic hinge in the center, that might give me a little bit more movement. Ultimately, that failed as well, and I ended up going with a straight line across the horizontal stabilizer for my elevator. So it looks, I don't know if I've dry fit that or if I've glued it. If I did glue it, I used Gorilla Glue on the wings, glued them in place, and Gorilla Glue to glue the horizontal stabilizer in place. So the way I'm taping the top here tells me that maybe I've already put my motor mount in, or there now I'm making the motor mount right now. You can't see it because of the angle, but there is an L bracket with a motor mount, and that motor mount probably stretches 4 or 5 inches above the fuselage to allow for a very long prop. Well, not very long, but at least an 8-inch prop. Ultimately, that solution failed, and I'll show you at the end of the video what I did instead. And here I'm cutting out the portion of the fuselage that I'm going to end up using for the battery and the receiver. And the soldering iron didn't work too badly for this, but like I said, a well-ventilated area would be important for this. It did take time to melt all that foam. It would almost be better if I had like a scoop, like a U-shaped hot wire cutter, a thin U-shaped hot wire cutter that I could have just kind of scooped down the length and up and pulled a big chunk out. But this eventually got the job done, as you can see. You can see me testing with a larger battery there, probably a 2200. I found from my first couple flights that this plane seems to fly best with a 1300 milliamp hour 3-cell. I've also flown it with an 1800 or a 1750, and I'm sure it would fly with a 2200. I just like it best with the smaller battery. Just a little 30-second segment before I put the planes away. I was just out flying the Air Hogs Titan, probably the third or fourth successful time flying it, and I want to highlight one or two spots where I've changed the original version that you'll see in the build video to the one that actually flies. So here we go. Originally in the build video, I had the pusher mounted here and coming up and with a giant prop on the top. And what happened is when I would accelerate, so even on takeoff, the thrust was so heavy there that it would push the nose into the ground. I could have probably overcome that by either changing the angle, moving it, or maybe using a smaller prop. But instead, I decided to go with the more traditional, which I've seen on YouTube several times, moving the prop to the back of the plane. And you can see I actually just cut off the bracket, so I'm basically using a standard L bracket. I've cut a notch in the back of the plane and I shoved the L bracket in there with some Gorilla Glue, and then to give it some stability I just put an extra piece of foam in there so it doesn't bend forward. So that's what I'm using for a prop mount or for a motor mount for the back of the plane. There's some ugly wires that I'll probably end up cleaning up eventually. The other thing that I changed was originally I had the elevator coming off with the original elevator on an angle, and I wish I had just cut it straight across because the hinging just doesn't work on the angle. I tried to do something fancy and it didn't work. So if you're building this, just go straight across in the elevator and do your hinging that way. So I ended up throwing out the original piece on the back here and just using some Dollar Tree foam board straight back with my standard packing tape style hinge. So that's it. Other than that, it's all as the original build video. And this thing flies beautifully. I've flown it on both a 1300 milliamp hour battery, 3-cell, and a 1700, and it flies fine. I'm sure it would also fly with a 2200. I think though that for me it flies best on the 1300. It allows me to do nice low slow passes. It glides beautifully into landing, and I still get 10 to 15 minutes of flight time. Not at full throttle, but most of the flying's done at half throttle and a little bit at full here and there. So that's it. Originally I wasn't too impressed with this. I'm going to show some of my failure attempts at flying it, but now it's become one of my more favorite planes. It's up there with me flying the Hawk Sky and of course my wings. I always love flying the wings. They're exciting to fly. Anyway, take it easy, and I'll add this into the end of the build video in case anybody decides they want to do this conversion themselves. Oh! How do you like that? Ever seen that before? A little touch and go with the Air Hogs Titan.
You maybe should bring it in. You're getting a little saucy.
Well, the problem is I watched planes last night, and you know, if he's able to do it in the ocean, why shouldn't I be able to do it on a field? Just touch the wing down and then keep on flying. Well, the battery's gone anyway. I'm out of battery. I have just enough to bring it back. There you go. Air Hogs Titan, third time's a charm.